Hey there, welcome back. Tonight, we're stepping quietly into a world built of creaking timber, salted rope, and lantern light, an ancient realm that drifted across the dark waters of the medieval seas. These ships, humble and worn, carried men who sought fortune, escape, or simply another sunrise beyond the horizon. By watching this video, you'll discover what life truly felt like inside a medieval pirate ship, how people slept, ate, worked, feared, and survived together in a floating wooden universe far from the safety of land. Before we begin, a small note. If you enjoy these calm journeys through history, I upload new videos every day, so consider subscribing and turning on the bell. And tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? I love imagining people drifting off to the same story under different skies. Now take a breath, settle your shoulders, and let's step into the lantern-lit silence of the medieval sea. The night begins with a low hush, a gentle weave of wind and water brushing against the hull. The ship sits like a dark silhouette against an even darker sea, its masts rising like skeletal towers into the sky. Lanterns hang from iron hooks and sway with the slow breathing of the waves, sending shards of amber light across the planks. Each flame trembles in the wind, casting long shadows that stretch across the deck like tired arms reaching toward the railings. The air is a blend of salt and wood smoke, salt from the sea foam that dries on every rope and board, wood smoke from the small brazier used hours earlier to heat a simple meal. As you step forward onto the deck in your mind's eye, your boots would feel the faint dampness left from the evening mist, and beneath that, the deeper warmth of worn timber that has soaked up years of sun, storms, and sweat. Somewhere near the bow, a sailor mutters a prayer under his breath, not loudly enough for anyone to hear clearly. The sea can shift without warning. Men who live on its back know that silence is not the absence of danger, but the space where danger gathers its breath. Still, the deck remains calm tonight. The waves roll slowly, and the ship yields to them like a great animal in a long, slow sleep. Under the lanterns, coils of rope lie like dormant serpents. Their fibers smell of hemp, wet brine, and old tar. Nearby, a wooden bucket creaks softly, nudged by the movement of the hull. It carries the metallic scent of seawater mixed with something earthy, perhaps the remnants of a scrub down from earlier in the day. Every object on this ship tells a story of utility and freight endurance. A faint, rhythmic tapping echoes from below, the steady work of the water against the keel. It has the same hypnotic cadence as a heartbeat, slow and ancient, guiding the ship forward while the men sleep or tend their quiet tasks. You can almost feel the vibrations travel through the soles of your feet, rising up through the planks like a message from the deep. Far overhead, the sails, currently drawn up and tied, rustle gently. They are made of rough woolen or linen cloth, patched so many times that no one can recall their original shape. The ropes that hold them look black in the dimness, but when the lantern flame brushes their edges, they reveal threads of pale gold and gray woven into years of use. A gull cries faintly in the distance, a lonely sound that slips between the masts before fading back into the night. Closer to the center of the deck, the sound changes. It becomes quieter, more enclosed. This is the space where the hatch to the lower deck sits. The wooden cover is slightly ajar tonight to allow cooler air to drift downward. From inside comes a scent of damp wool, human breath, and the faint musk of sleeping bodies. The hold is cramped, but we'll descend into that world later. For now, the deck remains the heart of nightlife on a pirate ship. A lantern hangs on a beam near the helm, where the helmsman stands alone. He is a shadow, wrapped in a cloak, steady hands resting on the worn wooden wheel. His breath rises in pale clouds. He says nothing. The ship obeys him with slow, tired grace. The wheel creaks softly each time he shifts his weight, adding to the layered symphony of the vessel, wood, rope, wind, water, and the faint hum of life inside. Behind him, tied to the railing, A row of barrels sways. Some hold fresh water, some hold pickled vegetables, some hold salted fish. They move with a soft thudding sound, like muted drums as the sea nudges the hull. On the barrel tops, tiny droplets of moisture gather and catch what little lantern light reaches them, turning them into trembling stars that vanish and reappear with each movement. As the ship glides forward, the night sky opens above, vast, unbroken, indifferent. Medieval sailors read it the way others read letters on a page. The constellations, though not mapped with scientific precision, carry centuries of whispered meaning. The men believe certain stars bring luck, others misfortune. Some will not look at particular clusters on nights when the sea is too calm or too dark. Superstition is not a flaw here. It is a survival tool. Your gaze drifts toward the bow again, where a figurehead, perhaps a woman carved from pale wood, juts out over the waves. Her features are weathered smooth, her expression unreadable. Salt crystals cling to her cheeks like frozen tears. Each time the ship dips into a wave, she disappears for a heartbeat beneath the spray before rising once more, patient and eternal. The gentle percussion of droplets hitting her wooden face echoes faintly across the deck. It is a soft sound, almost like fingertips tapping on a drum. In the dimness, the railings gleam with a thin sheen of moisture. Touching them would leave your fingers cool and a little sticky with salt. Another sailor passes through the lantern light, his steps muffled by the sea-slick planks. He checks a rope, knots it again, and whispers a small rhyme meant to ward off misfortune. His hands are rough, scarred, and stained with tar. Yet his voice is soft, almost fragile. He moves on without noticing your presence. The quiet is immense, but never empty. Every sound, every creak, sigh, flutter, tap, and whisper settles into a slow rhythm that guides the mind downward into rest. The medieval sea was a place of danger, yes, but it was equally a place of endless calm, especially on nights like this, when the wind glides without hurry and the waters reflect a sky untouched by the glow of any town. Here, in this floating wooden world, the men drift between wakefulness and sleep, between fear and acceptance, between the life they once knew and the life they now chase across the unknown horizon. And as the lanterns sway, shedding their soft circles of light across the black water, you sense that tonight the sea is allowing you to witness its quiet side, its deep, old gentleness that has cradled ships for centuries. Part 2. Timber, tar, and the smell of salted ropes. The night still holds the ship in its slow, steady hand. Above, the stars continue their silent turning. Below, the black water pushes and releases the hull with a patient rhythm. You are still on the same vessel, the same drifting world of wood and rope. But now we step closer, not to the men themselves, but to the bones of the ship that carries them. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the vessel breathing. The structure of a medieval pirate ship is not elegant in the way a palace or a cathedral might be. It is practical, rough, and surprisingly intimate. The hull is a body of overlapping planks fixed to sturdy ribs, all of it bound together by iron nails, wooden pegs, and an endless smear of tar and pitch. When you place your hand on the inner wall, it feels cool and slightly sticky in some places, dry and splintered in others. There is nothing polished here. Everything is touched by weather, sweat, and time. The timbers themselves have a life story long before they ever meet the sea. Many are cut from oak or pine, felled in quiet forests where the air smelled of moss and damp earth instead of salt. You can imagine a carpenter's hand tracing the grain, deciding where to make a cut, where to bend, where to notch for joints. Those choices survive in the ship's shape, preserved in every curve of the hull and every beam overhead. If you look up from within the lower deck, you see them crossing like ribs inside a great wooden animal. Every plank is soaked with stories. Salt has seeped into the pores, leaving pale crusts along the seams. Tar has been brushed and smeared again and again into the joints where planks meet, forming dark veins that gleam faintly under lamplight. The smell of it is sharp and almost medicinal, a mix of resin, smoke, and something bitter. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your hands. Even when the sea air is cold and clean on your face, tar still lingers in your nose, a reminder of the thin barrier between you and the depths. Ropes hang in thick coils along the sides of the deck and near the masts. They are made of twisted fibers, hemp, flax, sometimes other plant fibers that have been combed, spun, braided, and treated with tar or oil. When you pick up a length of it, it scratches lightly against your palm. The texture is rough, with small hairs that tickle the skin, but beneath that roughness you feel strength. Each fiber on its own is fragile. Together, they hold the weight of sails, anchors, cargo, and sometimes human lives. The scent around the rope racks is its own small world, salty, oily, and faintly sour from the moisture that never quite leaves. Drops of old seawater have dried and crusted on some strands, leaving tiny white flecks you can scrape away with a thumb. On others, beads of tar have hardened like dark little pearls. When the ship rocks, the coils sway gently, bumping softly into one another with a dry, padded sound. Walking along the deck, your feet pass over a pattern of patched planks. Some are new and pale, still showing saw marks and clean grain. Others are old, darkened almost to black, rounded smooth by countless footsteps and the grinding slide of boots, barrels, and crates. The nails that hold them down glint in the lantern light, some rusty and worn, some newer and brighter. Every repair tells of a past wound, a storm that tore at the hull, a rock grazed too closely, a long voyage that simply wore the wood thin. Below deck, the air changes. As you descend the narrow ladder, the smell of tar becomes heavier, thicker, like a curtain you must pass through. The wood down here is closer to the waterline, closer to the constant pressure of the sea. When the ship leans, you can hear small trickles and creaks from the lowest boards, as if the ocean is whispering its presence just beyond the planks. The walls are close, and the ceiling beams dip low enough that taller men must stoop. When your hand trails along the curved side of the hull, you feel the slight give of the planks, the faint vibration of each wave hitting from outside. It is not a solid, silent barrier. It is more like a drum, its skin forever being tapped with invisible fingers. Every thud, every soft slap sends a small shiver through the framework, and the ship answers with a chorus of squeaks and groans from its joints. In some places, pitch has dripped down in hardened stalactites, dark and glossy. If you touch one, it feels like glass at first, then a little sticky where it thins out. Some drops caught dust as they cooled, and now tiny grains of sawdust and salt cling, frozen in their surfaces. On very warm days, these pitch drips can soften again, releasing their scent and leaving faint smears on anything that brushes against them. Along the inner hull, timber braces cross the space, holding everything in shape. They are like the bones of an old creature, thick and unadorned. In the dim light, shadows gather in the angles where beams meet, forming dark pockets where the eye cannot easily follow. Rats sometimes dart through these small hollows, their movements a faint rustle against the wood. The men hear them and barely react. They are simply another part of the ship, like the creaking beams in the dripping water. The deck planks above your head are streaked with stains from years of spilled ale, seawater, mud, and sweat. Between them, slender gaps reveal thin threads of lamplight from the world above. On nights when a lantern stands just overhead, a beam of amber light falls through and paints a narrow stripe across the lower deck, catching dust motes as they drift slowly in the heavy air. Barrels and crates line the walls, wedged between braces and lashed with ropes so they will not roll. Many of these wooden containers carry the same scent as the ship itself, a blend of tree sap and sea. The iron bands around the barrels are cool and slightly damp to the touch. When the ship rocks, the bands mutter softly against the wood, metal whispering against grain. As you move forward, the sounds change, wood knocking against wood, ropes creaking, the faint slosh of liquid inside sealed containers. Somewhere near the bilge, unseen hands have stuffed cloth and scraps into any suspicious seam where water might seep in. The ship is always in quiet negotiation with the sea, always patching, sealing, tightening, reinforcing. There is no moment when it is truly finished. There is only the current state of being seaworthy enough. Up on deck again, the mast rises from the center like a living tree stripped of branches. Touching it, your fingers encounter a vertical river of scars, knots, cuts, burn marks where lanterns came too close, grooves worn by ropes running over the same spot for year after year. The mast carries the memory of every voyage, every storm, every hurried adjustment of sail. When the wind brushes its length, it hums softly, and the sound travels down into the planks under your feet. Near the base of the mast, a tangle of lines lies ready, some used to raise and lower sails, others to adjust their angle, others to secure cargo or rigging. They cross over each other like veins, forming small islands of order in a world that seems constantly in motion. Each line has a particular feel, a certain thickness and stiffness. Skilled hands can find the right rope even in darkness by touch alone. Tar is the ship's constant companion, and sometimes its smell is almost overwhelming. It is there on the ropes, on the hull, on the seams, on the men's fingers and boots. When the ship leaks, tar is heated and brushed over the cracks. When a new plank is fitted, its edges are coated. When sails or lines need extra protection, tar is thinned and poured, soaking into fibers like a dark, bitter varnish. The result is messy and imperfect, but it keeps the water out and the wood alive a little longer. Sometimes, late at night, a few men work by torchlight or a low-burning lantern to patch a trouble spot. The pitch in the pot bubbles gently, sending waves of sharp, resinous smoke curling into the air. The brush or rag they use leaves streaks that glisten wetly before dulling as they cool. The work is slow, repetitive, and strangely soothing. Each stroke draws another line of defense against the sea. If you close your eyes and simply listen, the ship's construction speaks in its own language. The low groan of beams when a wave lifts the hull, the soft slap of rigging against the mast, the jittering knock of a loose peg that someone will find and fix tomorrow, the faint scratch of rope fibers dragging across a wooden edge, the distant, more ominous thud when a heavier swell hits the side and rolls beneath. All of this, the timber, the tar, the ropes, the creaking ribs and patched seams, creates a cradle of sorts. It is not a gentle cradle in the way a feather mattress might be, but it is steady, and it holds. The men aboard this medieval pirate ship trust these materials more than they trust the sea, and often more than they trust each other. Wood, rope, and tar do not lie. They simply endure, or they fail. Tonight, as the vessel slides slowly over the dark water, the structure itself feels almost protective. The hull curves around the sleeping men like cupped hands. The ropes hold the mast upright like sinews. The tar seals every vulnerable place, a dark, shining bandage over each cut. In its own rough, weather-beaten way, the ship is a shelter, one built not of marble or glass, but of trees, fibers, and fire. And as you breathe in the mingled scents of timber, tar, and salted ropes, you begin to understand. This is not just a machine that carries pirates from one raid to another. It is a small floating world made by human hands, held together by labor and habit and quiet faith that the wood will keep out the deep for one more night. Part 3. The Quiet Brotherhood of the Deckhands. The night settles deeper over the ship, and with it comes a shift in the air, a soft thickening, as though the darkness itself has weight. Somewhere below the deck planks, the men who keep this drifting world alive are beginning to settle into their own rhythms of rest, murmurs, and silent tasks. To understand life inside a medieval pirate ship, you must step into the world of the deckhands, the quiet brotherhood that turns a fragile wooden vessel into something capable of crossing oceans. They are not the swaggering figures of tavern stories. Their lives are built from the repetition of simple acts, tying knots, hauling lines, scrubbing planks, trimming sails, and keeping 1,000 small details from slipping into neglect. Every movement is shaped by necessity, and every necessity shaped by the sea. When you descend toward the lower deck, the temperature shifts. The warm breath of dozens of men lingers in the close air, mingling with the scents of salt, wool, leather, and bodies that have labored for long hours. Their conversations are low, barely more than the rustle of fabric and the faint thrum of a tired voice. The men here speak softly, not because they are timid, but because loudness is unnecessary. Their world is too small, too shared, too interconnected. In the dim lantern glow, you begin to see their faces. Some are young, barely old enough to have grown the first shadow of a beard. Others are weathered, their skin lined by wind, sun, and sorrow. A few come from distant ports, with accents marked by mountains or deserts or river valleys. Others are local fishermen's sons who traded nets for open water and the promise of coin. A deckhand's hands tell his story more clearly than his face. Calluses with the hardness of stone, cuts healing beneath tar stains, knuckles swollen from work rather than violence. Each finger remembers the distinct feel of ropes, thin lines that burn and slice, thick hawsers that bruise the palms, damp cords that cling like cold serpents. Many men bear rope scars across the inner fold of their first knuckles, pale lines left by sudden tension when a line jerked harder than predicted. Their clothing is rough and mismatched. Some wear trousers made from old sailcloth, stiff at the knees and patched with uneven squares of fabric. Others wear woolen shirts whose collars have long ago lost their shape. Many go barefoot when the weather permits, their soles hardened to the uneven, often splintered deck. They move with a kind of collective instinct, stepping around loose coils of rope, ducking under beams, gripping railings when the ship tilts unexpectedly. You hear a faint laugh from the corner, a tired, breathy chuckle shared between two sailors who sit side by side, carving small shapes from scraps of wood. One whittles the silhouette of a tiny fish. The other works on what appears to be a miniature cup. The carvings may be traded later or simply kept as tokens, little pieces of the world shaped during moments of rest. The sound of their knives slipping through soft wood is delicate, almost soothing, like crisp pages turning in an old book. Further along, another man settles his back against a beam, pulling a strip of leather taut as he sharpens his knife with slow, even strokes. The rasp of the blade against stone is steady, rhythmic. A lantern above him sways gently, casting light across his face in thin golden bands. The glow passes over a narrow scar along his cheek, over eyes that seem older than the rest of him. Many pirate crewmen carry such small reminders of previous voyages, cuts and burns and bruises that linger like half-forgotten memories. There is a sense of unspoken fraternity among them. These men, though strangers in many ways, share the closeness of those who sleep mere inches apart, who depend on each other for survival in storms, and who know that a careless mistake from one can endanger all. They have learned the cadence of each other's breathing, the meaning of each other's silences. In the dark, with lantern shadows trembling across the walls, they drift not as individuals, but as parts of a single living entity, the crew. In the center of the hold, A small group sits around a makeshift table fashioned from a plank laid over crates. The plank is stained by old spills, but tonight it holds a simple game of knucklebones. The bones clatter softly when thrown, landing with a muted tap on the wood. The men speak sparingly, only to comment on a toss, or mutter good-natured curses when a piece rolls off into the dark. They play not to win, but to pass the time, to soothe the restless energy that lingers even after a long day of toil. Others lie awake in their hammocks, rocking gently with the ship's motion. Their hands rest on their stomachs or behind their heads, and their eyes follow the dim shape of the beams above. Some hum soft tunes, barely audible, inherited from mothers or grandfathers or strangers met in old ports. The melodies drift through the lower deck like wandering spirits, weaving between hammocks and crates. Their softness carries more comfort than words ever could. It is difficult to say who among them is educated in letters and numbers. Most are not. Knowledge here is measured differently. In knots mastered, storms endured, the ability to read clouds, to judge wind, to interpret the subtle groan of the hull. Wisdom is felt rather than written, passed from older sailors to younger ones through small corrections, a hand adjusting another hand's grip, a nod of approval after a line is coiled neatly. Occasionally, a low whistle echoes from the staircase leading to the upper deck, signaling a shift change. A handful of men rise from their hammocks, rubbing their eyes, stretching stiff limbs. They do not complain. Complaints are useless on the sea. The tide does not wait for comfort. Their movements are quiet, patient. They pull on cloaks or loose shirts and climb toward the deck where the wind awaits. One of them pauses and glances back. In the flicker of lantern light, you see his gaze settle on the sleeping forms of his companions. There is no sentimentality in his expression, only a deep, gentle familiarity, as though he is looking at a family he did not choose but has learned to trust. Then he disappears up the steps, swallowed by the cool night air. Back below, the smell of smoke still hangs faintly from earlier cooking, mixing with the more constant odors of tar and sweat. A sailor near the stern leans over a bucket, washing grime from his arms with seawater scooped in tin cups. The water is cold, almost biting, and each splash echoes against the wooden walls. When he finishes, he wipes his face with a cloth and sighs, a long, weary exhale that seems to release a day's worth of tension into the dimness. The lower deck creaks softly as the ship shifts. The men barely react. They have lived so long with the sea's unpredictable rhythm that each vibration feels like part of their body's own pulse. A lantern swings overhead, and its warm light brushes across the hammocks. For a moment, the hold looks like a sanctuary, a chapel built not of stone and stained glass, but of tarred beams and woven rope. Somewhere to the right, a man murmurs a prayer. His voice is rough but gentle, shaped by both faith and fatigue. It is not a request for fortune or treasure, but for a safe crossing, for steady winds, for one more dawn. The men around him are not surprised. On a ship far from land, prayers thread into the fabric of the night as naturally as the creaking of wood or the lapping of waves. The brotherhood here is not forged by affection, but by interdependence. Each man holds the lives of the others in his hands without ever naming that truth aloud. In the dark, their breathing syncs with the ship's movement, as though they have become a choir of quiet lungs inhaling and exhaling with the tide. And as the lanterns burn low, casting a final shimmer across the wooden walls, the deck hands drift into a gentle silence. Their world is small, but within it lies a deep, shared resilience, an unspoken understanding that each night survived is another step towards some distant, imagined shore. Part 4. Bread, brine, and midnight hunger. The night deepens, and with it comes a slow, creeping awareness of hunger, an ache that is never fully satisfied on a medieval pirate ship. Food is not a comfort here. It is not a pleasure, nor an art, nor even a predictable routine. It is survival, shaped by salt, scarcity, and the stubborn will to endure. To understand life aboard this ship, you must follow the scent of brine into the small, dim spaces where meals are made, shared, hoarded, and feared. The scent of old cooking lingers faintly in the air, caught between layers of tar, sweat, and damp timber. Hours have passed since the evening meal, yet traces remain. A burnt edge of grain, a sour note of vinegar, the dull sweetness of boiled roots. These smells drift in the lower deck like ghosts of past dinners, reminding every man that food is never guaranteed and rarely fresh. Near the galley, if the cramped corner of the ship can even be called that, you see the tools of meager cooking. A small brazier, blackened by soot, rests on a bed of sand to keep the embers contained. The metal pot above it is battered and dented, its lid slightly warped from years of heat. When lifted, it squeals sharply. Inside, the remnants of the day's stew cling to the sides, a thin mixture of peas, barley, salt, and whatever scrap of meat or fish happened to be available. A wooden ladle lies beside the pot, stiff with dried broth. Its handle is smooth, where countless hands have held it, but the bowl is chipped, darkened by smoke and use. The cook, sometimes a volunteer, sometimes the same exhausted man each day, moves with slow familiarity, knowing each imperfection of the pot, each spot where the brazier burns hottest, each corner of the tiny workspace where a knife can be safely set down without sliding when the ship tilts. Food on this vessel must last for weeks, sometimes months. It begins plentiful. Barrels packed tight with salted fish, dried beans, hardtack, and coarse meal. But the sea is merciless. Moisture creeps into everything. Mold hides beneath cloth covers. Weevils appear in every crack and seam, turning flour into a living, crawling mass. Men learn to shake their biscuits vigorously to dislodge the insects before eating, and eventually they stop noticing the faint crunch of what they missed. Hardtack is the backbone of their meals. It is a small, square biscuit so dense it can break a tooth if bitten carelessly. At first, the men soak it in stew or water, but as supplies diminish, even the luxury of softening it becomes rare. Sometimes it is eaten dry, scraped clean of mold, and swallowed with slow determination. A sailor holds a piece between his fingers now, tapping it lightly against a beam. The dull, heavy sound reveals exactly what it is, a ration, not a food. Beside him, another man gnaws quietly at a strip of salted meat. The meat is tough, almost leather-like, and its saltiness is overwhelming. His jaw works steadily, each chew a slow grind of effort. Salt draws every drop of moisture from the tongue, leaving thirst that can rarely be quenched. Fresh water is precious, rationed strictly, stored in barrels that absorb their own faint flavors of wood and age. Sometimes the water tastes sweet and clean. Other times it tastes like damp bark or old smoke. The men drink anyway. A few sailors gather near the galley, hoping for a scrap of leftover stew. They stand politely, saying little. One taps his foot lightly, not impatiently, but out of habit. When the cook finally lifts the pot to scrape the bottom, a hush falls over the group. The sound of the ladle dragging across the metal, pulling up the last soft grains and bits of pea, becomes a moment of ceremony. Each man receives a spoonful or two, not enough to fill, only enough to steady. Further inside the hold, a sailor unwraps a small cloth bundle. Inside lies a personal stash, a piece of dried fruit saved from a previous raid, a crumb of cheese hardened into a stone-like wedge, or perhaps a few almonds. He eats quietly, alone, savoring the rare sweetness. Around him, the air smells of brine and old wool, but for a moment, the taste on his tongue pulls him back to a marketplace, a village, a home he barely remembers. Food becomes memory as much as sustenance. Sometimes, late at night, hunger wakes the men before their next shift. They lie in their hammocks, listening to the soft rumble of empty stomachs, theirs and others. It is an oddly communal sound, quiet, persistent, tying them together in a discomfort they have all learned to accept. The darkness, thick and warm, offers no distraction. Instead, it amplifies each scent drifting upward from the galley, the last embers cooling beneath the brazier, the acrid bite of old fat, the earthy smell of stored grain. Footsteps echo softly on the planks as a man walks toward the water barrel. The ladle clinks against the rim, breaking the stillness. He drinks slowly, letting the coolness spread through his chest. Behind him, someone whispers a joke about the water tasting like the ship itself. The others chuckle quietly, not out of amusement, but because laughter, however faint, eases the ache in the gut. On rare occasions, a fresh catch breaks the monotony. A sailor might haul up a line and find a silver flash at the end, an unexpected fish caught in a moment of luck. When that happens, the crew gathers around eagerly as the cook cleans and throws it into the pot, adding a burst of flavor to the bland stew. The smell of fresh fish spreads through the deck, warm and bright, lifting spirits. But such moments are fleeting. More often, hunger is a companion that walks beside every man, uninvited but familiar. The taste of vinegar is another constant. It is added to water to keep it from spoiling, poured over vegetables to preserve them longer, mixed into thin broths to bring sharpness to otherwise dull meals. The smell lingers in the air, its sour tang clinging to bowls and cups. When a man opens a barrel of preserved cabbage or onions, the scent rushes out like a slap. It fills the space, turning heads, wrinkling noses. Yet the men eat without hesitation. Flavor, even harsh flavor, is a gift. A few sailors sit near the stern, sharing a last bite before sleep. One breaks his biscuit in half and passes a piece to another who has finished his rations early in the week. There is no ceremony, no words. The gesture is simple, practical. Hunger softens pride, sharpening a sense of quiet generosity among those who depend on each other. Above their heads, the ship creaks as though shifting in its own sleep. The lantern flame dances, casting soft beams across the deck. The faint slosh of water in barrels sounds like gentle breathing. The scent of food, such as it is, settles slowly, sinking into the wood as it has for years. In the dimness, the men lean back, letting the warmth of the brazier fade into the stillness of the hold. Hunger is part of life here. It is accepted, endured, woven into the rhythm of the sea, and as the night stretches on, the men drift into a quiet, shared understanding that tomorrow the food will be the same. The meals will be simple, small, often unsatisfying, but they will be enough to keep the ship moving, enough to keep the crew alive beneath the vast, indifferent sky. Part 5. Hammocks in the dark hold. The deeper hours of night settle over the ship like a heavy woolen cloak, soft in some places and suffocating in others. Above the deck, the lanterns sway quietly with the rhythm of the sea, but down here, in the lowest chambers of the vessel, the light is dimmer, the air thicker, and the sense of enclosure unmistakable. This is where the crew sleeps, or tries to. A medieval pirate ship does not have beds, nor cots, nor private corners. Instead, it holds a forest of hammocks, slung between beams like pale cocoons of worn canvas. They sway gently in the dark, tracing small arcs with the ship's movement, each one containing a man drifting somewhere between fatigue and shallow dreams. Stepping into this space is like entering a chapel of exhausted bodies. The first thing you feel is the air, warm, humid, and heavy with the scent of unwashed wool, sweat soaked into fabric, damp timber, and the faint sourness of old meals. It is not unpleasant so much as overwhelming. a reminder that dozens of men share a space smaller than many barns on land. The hammocks hang at varying heights, some nearly brushing the floorboards, others tight and high, tied by men who trust their knots more than they trust their balance. The ropes that hold them creak softly, stretched and retied so many times that each fiber seems to carry its own memory. As the ship rocks, the hammocks sway, not always in unison, but with the slow, irregular pattern of breathing, rising and falling, shifting and settling. A lantern hangs low from a central beam, its flame small but steady, casting long, soft shadows across the curved walls. The light touches the shapes of sleeping men, a shoulder rising, a foot slipping from the edge of canvas, fingers curled loosely around the rope above. Some sleep on their backs, their heads tilted slightly to the side. Others curl tightly, knees bent, as though they expect the night to demand protection. The sound is a tapestry of small, human noises, the low rumble of a snore from the far corner, the sharp exhale of someone turning in his hammock, the rustle of canvas shifting under weight, a quiet murmur, half a dream, half a memory escaping a man's lips, and beneath it all the constant pulse of the sea, the steady slosh of water brushing against the hull, the groan of wood adjusting to the tide, the faint tapping of loose objects that drift ever so slightly with the ship's rocking. Some men sleep deeply, sinking into dreams shaped by fatigue and the motion of the sea. Others remain half awake, their bodies never completely releasing the tension of a life lived inches from danger. A sailor near the stern lies, with one arm draped across his eyes, trying to shut out even the thin line of lantern light. His hammock sways gently beneath him, rocking him with the same rhythm that has carried him across countless nights. But sleep comes slowly. His breath is shallow, and every so often he shifts his weight, the canvas creaking sharply before settling again. Across from him, another man sleeps easily, mouth slightly open, hair falling in tangled strands across his forehead. His chest rises and falls steadily, each breath deep and relaxed. Some people learn to sleep at sea as though born for it, letting the ship cradle them like an oversized mother with a long memory and patient arms. His hammock drifts in a smooth arc, shadow sliding across the wall behind him like a quiet wave. Tucked against the starboard side, a small group of hammocks hangs close enough that the men touch elbows now and then. These are the younger sailors, boys who join the crew with more courage than experience. They sleep lightly, often waking at the slightest shift in sound or motion. One of them, restless tonight, opens his eyes and gazes upward. He watches the lantern flicker, the shadows trembling across the beams. His face is calm, but there is a softness in his expression, a hint of homesickness perhaps, or a yearning for the quiet land he left behind. The hammock nearest the hatch belongs to a veteran sailor whose body has been shaped by years on the water. His arms are thick, his fingers marked by deep rope scars that look like pale ridges. Even in sleep, he holds the rope above his hammock loosely, a habit learned from storms. In rough weather, he can wake instantly, gripping the rope tight to steady himself. Tonight, the sea is gentle. His grip loosens little by little until his hand falls softly onto his chest. Farther inside, you see a man sleeping with his boots still on. It is not laziness. It is precaution. If the ship is boarded or struck, if a storm rises without warning, if the captain calls for all hands on deck, he wants to be ready. His sleep is shallow, broken into fragments. Every time the hull groans more loudly than usual, his eyelids flutter, but fatigue eventually pulls him back down. Between the hammocks, personal belongings hang from nails or pegs, small cloth pouches, carved trinkets, slivers of driftwood shaped into charms, a copper coin with a hole through the center. These items whisper stories of families, villages, early loves, childish hopes, Memories of land do not survive long here without being carefully protected, and the men guard them the way others guard treasure. A rat scurries across one of the beams near the floor, pauses to sniff the air, then disappears into a shadowed gap between crates. No one stirs. The rats have been here longer than most of the crew, and their presence is accepted. Annoying, yes, but unavoidable. Their small clicking claws against wood are just another layer of the ship's nighttime music. The hold itself breathes. When the ship leans to port, a rush of cool air slips in through a crack in the hatch above. It carries the sharp scent of the open sea, fresh and cold, cutting through the warm musk of the sleeping quarters. When the ship leans to starboard, the air grows still again, heavy and warm. This slow exchange continues throughout the night, creating a gentle cycling of scent and temperature. A man in the corner shifts in his hammock and draws a small cloth-wrapped bundle from his shirt, something like a charm or talisman. He holds it briefly, thumb brushing the fabric, before tucking it back against his breast and letting sleep reclaim him. On pirate ships, superstition is not childish. It is a source of comfort, a thread connecting men to things larger than themselves. The hammocks creak softly as the ship dips through a gentle swell, and the lantern above flickers, its golden flame stretching upward for a breath before settling back. Dust particles dance lazily in the column of light, rising and falling like tiny floating seeds. For a moment, the entire hold seems to sway in a single, unified rhythm. Wood, canvas, bodies, breath, lantern light, sea. There is a profound intimacy in this room. Not affection, not camaraderie exactly, but shared existence. The closeness of the hammocks means the men sleep with the soft brush of another breath only inches away, with the warmth of another's body passing through the air. They learn to accept it, even rely on it. In the deepest part of night, that closeness feels almost protective, a reminder that no one endures the sea alone. As the hours slip by, the sounds soften further. Snoring becomes slower. Hammocks sway in longer arcs. The ship itself seems to quiet, as though respecting the slumber of its crew. And down here, in the dark cradle of the hold, where dozens of men drift in suspended slings of canvas and hope, the medieval pirate ship becomes something more than a vessel. It becomes a shelter, not comfortable, not gentle, but enduring, a place where sleep and survival interlace beneath the endless night. Part 6. The Captain's Small Dominion. The hold grows quieter as the night settles deeper into its own stillness, but above the hammocks, past the narrow ladder and the swaying lanterns, there lies a small private world, one of the very few enclosed spaces on the entire ship that belongs to a single man, the captain's cabin. It is not grand, it is not spacious, it is not even comfortable, but compared to the communal hammocks below, it feels almost like a kingdom, fragile, simple, and shaped more by responsibility than luxury. When you step toward the stern of the ship and push open the low wooden door, the first thing you notice is the air. It is cooler here, touched by small drafts that slip through the seams of the timbers. The room is dimly lit by a single lantern hanging from a hook, its flame steady and calm. The shadows it casts are long and clean, falling across objects arranged with careful intention. The captain's desk, if it can be called that, is a plank nailed to 2 sturdy supports. Its surface is scratched, stained by ink, and worn smooth by years of use. Upon it lies a small chest of rolled charts, drawn by dim candlelight, corrected by trial and error, sometimes copied from maps seized from captured vessels. The vellum is yellowed and curled at the edges, carrying the faint scent of lamp oil and old leather. Beside the maps sits a simple compass, its brass dulled by tarnish. When the ship moves, the needle trembles, struggling to hold its direction. A weight rests beside it, a smooth stone taken from some far-off shore, its pale gray surface warmed by countless fingertips. Some captains use stones like this to calm their nerves, rubbing the surface when storms rise or decisions grow heavy. In the solitude of this cabin, small talismans matter. A quill rests in an ink pot that has tipped over more than once, leaving dark rivulets hardened into the wood. The quill's feather is worn, its barbs clumped from humidity. When the captain writes, the scratching of the nib is the only sound in the room, except for the gentle groan of the planks behind him as the sea presses and releases. To the left, a narrow bunk is fixed directly into the wall. A thin mattress lies upon it, nothing more than stuffed wool sewn inside rough cloth. Yet after long days on deck, even this lumpy cushion feels like a mercy. A woolen blanket, patched and repatched, is folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Captains learn the value of order. In storms, disorder becomes danger. Above the bed hangs a small wooden box, carved with simple geometric patterns. Inside, the captain keeps what little he values most: a ring from a family he has not seen in years, a scrap of cloth from childhood, or perhaps a letter so faded the words are barely visible. Objects like these do not belong to the pirate S-world. They belong to the man who existed before the sea remade him. Across the cabin, a shelf holds a few practical comforts: a flask of watered-down wine, a small strip of salted meat wrapped in linen, a knife whose handle has been worn smooth by sleepless hands, a lantern shade made of thin horn, translucent and warm when lit. Each item has its place, and the captain knows them by touch even in darkness. There is always wind in this room. It seeps through cracks, hums softly around the shuttered stern windows, and lifts the corners of the maps. When the ship's stern dips into a wave, the breeze sharpens momentarily, bringing with it the sharp tang of sea spray. It fills the cabin with the scent of salt and cold water, diffusing the lantern's warmth into something more balanced, half fire, half ocean. From here, the captain hears everything: the muffled laughter from the lower deck, the occasional thud of a barrel shifting, the low murmur of sailors on night watch, the rustle of sails above. The ship's heartbeat is clearer here than anywhere else, throbbing softly through the timbers. And with that heartbeat comes responsibility. A captain must know when to turn with the wind, when to hold steady, when to trust the crew, when to doubt them, and when to risk everything. These choices echo in the quiet of this cabin, forming a kind of invisible pressure that hangs in the air. When the men sleep below, the captain remains half awake, ears attuned to the sea's whisper. A shift in the waves can mean a coming storm. A change in wind can alter the night's course. The creak of a rope can signal something loose, something dangerous. On the desk lies a logbook, its pages filled with cramped handwriting. Some lines note wind direction or distance traveled. Others note crew injuries, ration changes, disagreements settled. There are no poetic reflections here, no flourishes of emotion, just the simple record of what must be remembered. The ink is blotchy in places where the ship rocked during writing. Every pirate captain carries weight the crew rarely sees. He must judge character at a glance. He must divide plunder fairly or risk mutiny. He must punish without cruelty, reward without weakness. He must remain calm when storms tear at the sails, or when silence falls across the water in an unnatural, breath-holding way. He must, above all, keep fear hidden, because fear, once visible, spreads like fire in the wind. The cabin door rattles lightly as the ship shifts. The lantern flickers, sending shadows crawling across the walls like ink in water. For a moment, the room feels smaller, more fragile. The sea presses against the hull with a deeper, more resonant thud, a reminder that out there, just beyond this thin shell of timber, is vastness, cold and unyielding. The captain rubs his thumb across the edge of the map, tracing coastlines he knows only from rumor and instinct. His eyes are half lidded with exhaustion, yet his posture remains alert. Sleep rarely comes easily to him. When it does, it arrives in thin, fractured pieces, never enough to restore him fully. The ship, after all, does not pause simply because he wishes it to. Still, there is a quiet dignity in this small dominion. It is a place shaped by solitude, sharpened by duty, softened by the faintest remnants of memory. The lantern light glows like a promise of warmth in a world carved from wind and brine. Outside the stern window, the sea continues its ancient rhythm, rising, falling, rising again. And here, in this narrow cabin where maps rustle like whispers of distant shores, the captain sits alone with the ship, the night, and the weight of every soul aboard. Part 7. Songs Carried by the Wind. Night settles into its softest hours, the deep blue stretch of time when the world narrows into a handful of sounds: wood, water, breath, and the faint murmurs of memory. Up on the deck, beneath the trembling lanterns and the cold shimmer of stars, another element of medieval seafaring life begins to rise: the quiet, unhurried music of the crew. Not the loud, swaggering shanties of tavern tales, not rowdy choruses, nor drunken roars, but something older, slower, gentler, songs carried by the wind. At this hour, the ship feels suspended in a kind of hush. The sea is calm, broken only by the rhythmic sigh of waves brushing against the hull. The ropes creak softly, shifting in their pulleys, and the sails, furled for the night, flutter with the faintest flick of the breeze. This is the canvas on which the men paint their quiet melodies. A single voice often begins it. One sailor leans against the railing, cloak drawn around his shoulders, eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the sky meets the black water. He hums, a low, steady sound, barely more than a breath with shape. It rises from the chest like a warm exhale drifting into the open air. The melody has no clear beginning, no sharp note. It simply emerges, as natural as the tide. Others nearby hear it, but they do not interrupt. Instead, they listen with the soft attentiveness of men accustomed to silence. A few sway gently with the ship's movement, letting the hum carry them into the same slow rhythm. When a second voice joins, it slips in carefully, like a shadow settling beside another shadow. The harmony is subtle, two tones, close enough to blend, distant enough to ripple across the deck like a faint breeze. These songs are not written anywhere. They live in the collective memory of seafaring communities, in villages along cold coasts, in harbors where ships gather like old friends, in stories passed from father to son. Many of them do not even have words. They are simple patterns of sound, shaped by loneliness, by longing, by the gentle ache of travel without destination. Tonight, as the ship drifts, the melody drifts with it. One sailor begins to murmur lines in a forgotten dialect. The words are soft and uneven, rising and falling like waves against a cliff. They speak of home, of a shoreline where reeds grow thick, of a small stone house, of a mother's hands kneading bread near a warm hearth. The images flicker across his mind, carried on the breath of his song, and though no one else knows the exact meaning, they understand the feeling. Home is not a place to these men. It is a memory, thin as thread, strong as oak. Another sailor responds with a deeper voice, humming a counter melody that blends into the first like dusk blending into night. His tone is rough at the edges, shaped by years of wind and smoke. It has the weight of someone who has spent more time at sea than on land, someone whose memories flicker like embers when stirred. The wind catches the sound and lifts it, scattering it across the deck. It rolls across the planks, brushes against the lanterns, threads through the rope coils, and drifts toward the bow where a lone watchman stands. He leans on the railing, listening. The music is so faint that he must tilt his head a little to catch it, but once he does, he closes his eyes. Music at sea does not strive to fill space. It strives to soften it. Down below, a few men in their hammocks hear the distant hum. It slips through the cracks in the planks, weaving through the dim air like a wandering spirit. For those half asleep, it merges with dreams, becoming lullabies sung by wives or sisters, prayers whispered by grandparents, or the simple comfort of a quiet evening beside a familiar fire. Back on deck, a third sailor joins the others. His voice is young, almost fragile. Instead of singing, he whistles, slow notes, warm and light. The sound floats upward like smoke, looping softly before settling into the melody. His whistle has a lonely sweetness to it, a kind of innocent clarity that contrasts with the harshness of a pirate's life. For a moment, the deck feels transformed, less like a battleground of survival, more like a drifting sanctuary. One of the older men, arms crossed and leaning beside a mast, begins tapping the pad of his thumb against the wooden beam. The rhythm is gentle, repetitive, not a drum beat, but a heartbeat, a steady anchor for the others to follow. The mast responds with a soft vibration, a quiet resonance that adds depth to the drifting song. Even the ship seems to listen. The hull groans softly in its slow swing over the water, creating a deep undertone. The ropes click lightly in their housings. The sea adds the faint splash of waves kissing the bow. All these small sounds fold into the melody until it becomes impossible to say where the music ends and the night begins. Some sailors close their eyes. Others watch the stars. None speak. It is in these moments that the crew feels most human, not the feared pirates of whispered stories, but men far from land, sharing something tender in the darkness. Songs remind them that they are not merely bodies working at ropes and sails. They are memories and fears and hopes. They are sons, brothers, wanderers. They carry entire villages inside them, villages whose names the sea will never know. As the melody grows softer, it begins to unravel naturally, each voice fading back into breath, into the quiet rhythm of the ship. One by one, the men return to their thoughts. The wind slips between them, carrying the last echo of the song into the vastness beyond. When silence finally returns, it feels deeper, not empty, but comforted. The night is still the same dark expanse it was before, but now it holds a warmth, a human imprint left by a handful of notes shared under the stars. A few lanterns flicker. The sails stir with a whisper. The sea breathes, and somewhere in the shadows, a sailor hums one last line before letting sleep claim him. Part 8, Storm Watching and Quiet Dread. The night holds its breath. Up until now, the sea has been calm, its movement soft, its voice gentle, its pulse steady. But the medieval sailor knows better than to trust long stretches of peace. The ocean changes moods without warning, slipping from silence into violence as effortlessly as a candle shifts from steady flame to trembling wick. Tonight, something in the air begins to change. It starts subtly. A faint thickness settles over the deck, like the moment before the first drop of rain touches dry earth. The wind grows quieter, not calmer, but more deliberate, as though gathering strength. The lanterns sway a little more sharply, their flames leaning in one direction with an insistence that was not there before. The watchman at the bow feels it first. His senses are tuned to small differences. The way ropes tremble, the way the wooden rail hums beneath his palms, the way the horizon blends into a darker shade of blue. He lifts his chin, sniffing the wind. The air tastes metallic, damp with the promise of something approaching. A storm is not yet visible, but it is present, felt, not seen. Below deck, some of the men shift in their hammocks, not from sound, but from instinct. Their bodies have learned the early signs, the sharper sway of canvas, the faint stiffness in the ship's movements. Sleep becomes lighter, breaths shorter. A few open their eyes, listening to the quiet dread that vibrates through the timbers. On deck, the captain emerges from his cabin. He carries no lantern. His eyes are accustomed to the dark, but he touches the rail as he walks, reading the ship through the grain of the wood. When he reaches the bow, he stands beside the watchman without speaking. Their silence is its own language. Together, they study the horizon. The sky, once dotted with stars, now appears smudged. A thin veil of cloud slides over the moon, dimming its silver glow. The clouds move in long, low streaks, like brush strokes made by an impatient hand. Far to the west, the darkness feels heavier, denser in some places, hollow in others. Storms in the medieval imagination are living creatures, and this one seems to be stretching its limbs. A low rumble vibrates through the air. It is not thunder, not yet, but something deeper, a resonance that seems to come from beneath the water rather than above it. The men who hear it stiffen. Storm omens have many forms: a sudden silence, a warm wind at an hour when the night should be cold, or a distant groan that no one can quite locate. A sailor on deck crosses himself. Another touches the small charm hanging from his neck. Another whispers a rhymed prayer taught by his grandmother, a soft chant meant to keep waves at bay. Superstition is not foolishness here. It is comfort. As the ship pushes forward, the sea shifts beneath it. The surface grows uneven, as though invisible fingers run across it, disturbing its smoothness. The waves roll in heavier breaths now, lifting the hull with a slow, deliberate swell. Each rise is gentle, but each fall is sharper, tinged with warning. The ropes overhead begin to strain. Their fibers groan softly, a taut whisper that runs down the length of the mast. The sails, though tied, flicker with sudden tension, small bursts of movement like startled birds beating their wings inside cloth cages. Lanterns flicker more violently. A sudden gust sweeps across the deck, cold and insistent. It raises the edges of cloaks, ripples through loose shirts, and carries with it the unmistakable scent of rain, not the fresh scent of a morning drizzle, but the heavy, mineral-laced smell of a storm born far out at sea. The men on watch brace themselves. The captain tightens his grip on the rail. A bucket rolls across the deck with a hollow clatter before someone stops it with his foot. The storm is not yet here, but now it is on approach, visible in the shudder of lanternlight, audible in the shift of waves, tangible in the restless air. Suddenly, lightning flickers in the distance, a brief pale tear in the sky. It illuminates the underside of the clouds, revealing their swollen shapes, layered and tumbling like dark wool. A second flash follows, brighter, closer. The lightning has no thunder yet, but its silent blooming across the horizon feels ominous, like a warning whispered too softly for comfort. On medieval ships, men watch storms with a blend of awe and dread. The sea is not an enemy, but a powerful, unpredictable ruler, and storms are among its most fearsome commands. A storm can snap a mast, drown a man, rip apart a sail, or swallow a ship whole. Yet it can also pass quickly, leaving behind a cleansed sky and a humbled crew. A sailor near the mast ties down a loose coil of rope. His fingers move fast, knotting with practiced ease. The sound of rope brushing against wood becomes sharper, more urgent. Another checks the lashings securing the barrels, pressing down with both hands to make sure nothing will shift when the waves begin their assault. No orders have been shouted yet. There is no chaos, only preparation, a quiet acceptance that something larger than the ship approaches. The crew understands the rhythm of storms. They know the sequence, the uneasy air, the restless sea, the first flash of lightning, the shift in the wind's voice. And then comes the waiting. Waiting is its own kind of fear here. It tightens the throat, prickles the skin, sharpens the ears. It makes every sound feel like a message. A distant crack of thunder rolls across the water, soft at first, then growing into a long, low growl that settles into the ship's bones. The men exchange glances. The storm is still far, but thunder means movement. It means the cloud giant is coming closer. The captain lifts his face to the wind. He closes his eyes briefly, measuring its speed, its temperature, its scent. When he opens them again, his expression is unreadable, a blend of calculation and calm. He knows that the sea must be watched, not challenged, understood, not mastered. The lantern nearest the bow flickers, guttering for a moment before steadying again. The flame stretches sideways under a fresh gust. A strip of cloth tied to a railing begins to flutter wildly, slapping against the wood with a sharp, nervous rhythm. Below deck, the men, now fully awake, listen to the storm's first murmurs. Some sit up, barefoot on the planks. Others stand near their hammocks, bracing as the ship shifts a little more sharply. The darkness around them feels thicker, heavier, as though the sea itself has leaned closer to listen. Storms remind sailors of their smallness. The ocean does not rage out of malice. The wind does not turn cold out of cruelty. The clouds do not darken out of intent. But to the men in this fragile wooden vessel, it feels personal. It feels like being tested, measured, and reminded that life out here is held together by planks, rope, and hope. As thunder rolls again, louder this time, the crew stands ready, not in panic, but in quiet dread, a shared understanding that the night is shifting, that the air is thick with change, and that by dawn, the world may feel very different. Part 9. Hidden Codes and Unwritten Laws. The storm's first warnings still hum across the hull, but for now, the ship remains steady, suspended in that tense quiet before wind and water unleash their fury. In this fragile moment, the crew feels the weight of something deeper than weather, the invisible structure that binds them, guides them, and restrains them. A pirate ship may look like chaos from the outside. It may seem ruled by impulse, greed, and raw danger, but inside its wooden shell lives a quiet, powerful order, an unspoken code carried not in ink, but in the habits and instincts of every man aboard. Tonight, with lanterns flickering and the sea whispering its warnings, these unwritten laws settle across the crew like a second skin. The first code is simple. Share the danger, share the reward. Every man on this ship knows that his life is tied to the others. If the sails tear, all hands repair them. If the hull leaks, all hands patch it. When treasure is taken, the loot is divided in a structure more democratic than most medieval kingdoms. The captain receives a larger share, yes, but even the youngest sailor, barely grown, earns a portion. This equality is not kindness. It is survival. A man who feels cheated will not risk his life in a storm. A man who feels valued will climb the mast in a gale. So the crew divides its plunder with careful precision, using weighted scales or careful counting. Lanternlight reflects off coins and beads, off rings and silver spoons, off dice and broken bits of jewelry. The process is quiet, respectful. Even pirates know that fairness is the anchor of loyalty. The second code, respect the captain, but fear the crew. The captain's authority is absolute until it isn't. If he leads well, decides wisely, and keeps the ship afloat, the men follow him with calm, almost instinctive trust. But if he fails, the crew can vote him out. Mutiny is rare, not because men accept suffering, but because they understand its consequences. A failed mutiny ends in death. A successful one creates ripples of uncertainty that can poison a ship for years. So the code is clear. Silence your doubts. Observe your captain. Speak your concerns in private moments. Act only when necessary. This tense balance forms the spine of pirate command. The captain knows it. The crew knows it. That knowledge breathes through the ship like a quiet warning, sharpening discipline without a single shout. The third code whispers through the darker corners of the vessel. Steal nothing from your own. A pirate can take from nobles, from merchants, from the wealthy who sail with lavish goods, but to steal from a fellow sailor, from a hammock, from a pouch, from a coat, breaks the ship's most sacred trust. Men sleep inches apart. Their lives depend on shared vigilance. Theft within the crew is betrayal of the deepest kind. Punishment is swift and harsh, sometimes a whipping, sometimes being marooned on a barren islet with a knife and a bottle of water, sometimes something quieter. The thief simply disappears into the sea one night. No one speaks of it afterward. The code enforces itself. The fourth code is older. shaped by sailors long before piracy began. Never whistle during a calm night. Whistling invites wind, sometimes too much wind. Superstition, yes, but superstition is the backbone of survival at sea. The men cling to old beliefs because they provide structure in a world ruled by uncertainty. The sea punishes arrogance, and sailors know better than to tempt forces beyond understanding. Similarly, no one speaks ill of the ship herself. Old vessels carry memories. They respond to respect or to disrespect. A man who insults the hull may find himself assigned the worst tasks until he learns humility. The fifth code: every man must know every job. There is no room for specialization here. The sea does not care who is sick, who is tired, who is afraid. If a storm rises, all hands must know how to tie a reef knot, patch a sail, bail water, brace the mast, navigate by stars, and hold the ropes when the wind screams. A man who hesitates endangers everyone, so the crew trains each other constantly in small corrections, demonstrated knots, stories from past storms, warnings delivered over shared meals. The training is informal but relentless. Knowledge spreads like fire along a fuse until even the newest sailor can perform with instinct rather than thought. The sixth code is spoken softly during long voyages. Never drink fresh water without permission. Water is life. Barrels leak. Heat spoils the supply. Soul air makes thirst a constant companion. A man who drains a ladle too many drinks from the future, robbing others of days they may desperately need. Water discipline is strict, nearly sacred. The quartermaster guards the barrels with vigilance, noting each sip in a mental ledger. Even in darkness, the crew respects this rule more than any threat. Then there is the seventh code: silence during danger. When storms rise, noise becomes confusion. When enemy ships appear, whispers waste breath. When something creaks in the hull's lower shadow, every ear must listen. Quiet becomes communication. A hand on the shoulder replaces a command. A nod replaces an argument. A gesture toward the mast replaces a shouted order. Sound carries strangely across water at night. It can invite attention from those who lurk in the dark. So the men learn to treat silence not as emptiness, but as strategy. But the deepest code, the one that never appears in any charter, and yet shapes every moment aboard, is this: no one survives alone. A pirate ship may be filled with hard men, desperate souls, and wanderers, but it is woven from interdependence. Every man depends on the next. Bonds form in glances, in shared labor, in grunts exchanged over heavy ropes, in hands extended during dangerous climbs. They may not call it brotherhood, they may not admit to loyalty, but the truth is unmistakable in the way they move, synchronized, silent, trusting the rhythm they share. The sea threatens them endlessly. Storms stalk the horizon. Hunger gnaws. Danger waits in the shape of blades, waves, and fate. Their only defense is each other. And so the ship breathes with its hidden codes, its quiet laws, a fragile, unspoken structure that keeps order in a world where everything else is at the mercy of wind and water. Part 10: Night Watches and the Slow Turning of Stars. The storm still waits on the horizon, gathering its voice in the dark, but for the moment the ship moves with quiet purpose. As the deeper hours unfold, the night watch begins, an ancient ritual of vigilance, endurance, and silent communion with the sea. Most of the crew sleeps in their hammocks, drifting through the warm, heavy air of the hold. Up here on deck, however, a handful of men stand guard beneath the vast, turning dome of the sky. Their task is simple, yet sacred: keep the ship alive through the hours when sight grows faint, when danger hides, and when time itself seems to slow. This is the world of the night watch. The first thing you notice is the cold. Not a sharp, biting cold, rather a gentle, creeping one that works its way through fabric and into the skin. The wind feels different at night, less chaotic, more focused, carrying faint scents of wet rope, distant rain, and the cooled breath of the sea. The lanterns sway softly overhead, their flames bending but refusing to go out. The watchmen stand in quiet positions around the ship, one at the bow, two near the mast, another by the stern, and one pacing the deck in slow, measured arcs. They are silhouettes, more than figures, dark outlines against a darker sky, their cloaks stirring with each breath of the wind. Their eyes move constantly, scanning the distance, the sails, the lines of rope, the shadows. On land, a man's attention can wander. On the sea, wandering attention becomes peril. Above them, the stars move in a slow, deliberate dance. Sailors know the sky intimately. They read it the way monks read illuminated manuscripts, tracing meanings in patterns older than kingdoms. Constellations become friends, guides, warnings. The North Star in particular is a steady companion, bright, unwavering, a point of certainty in a world where everything else shifts. Tonight, the stars feel unusually close, as though the ship sails through a silent cathedral of light. A thin band of cloud drifts across them, dimming some, revealing others. The watchmen study the sky with a blend of reverence and practicality. A shift in brightness could mark incoming weather, a change in wind direction, or something else entirely. Near the mast, one sailor rests his gloved hands on a rope, feeling for subtle changes. Ropes speak their own language. A slight tightening can mean pressure in the sails. A sudden slackness can signal trouble aloft. His fingers, calloused and scarred, are as sensitive as the antennae of a nocturnal creature. He is not thinking of danger. He is simply listening. The wooden mast creaks softly above him, its tall shape catching the wind. Every so often, a loose pulley shifts with a muted click, followed by a brief flutter of cloth. These sounds are familiar, so familiar that the men can tell when something is wrong long before they see it. Farther aft, the helmsman stands at the wheel. His posture is relaxed, but his grip is steady. The wheel's wood is smooth from countless nights like this one, polished by sweat, sea spray, and the weight of responsibility. His eyes shift between the compass, dimly lit by a small shielded lantern, and the horizon, where clouds now gather in slow, uneven shapes. He hums occasionally, not a song, but a low vibration in his chest, barely audible. It keeps him awake. It reminds him that he is anchored to the ship, even when the ship seems anchored to nothing but the void. The bow lookout is the most solitary. He stands at the very front of the ship, where the rail curves like an arm reaching into the night. The wind hits him first, carrying the chill of distant waters. He peers into the darkness, eyes half narrowed, searching for the faint outline of land, the ghost shape of another ship, the shimmer of moonlight on a cresting wave. The sea ahead is a vast, shifting emptiness. Yet to him, it is full of signs. A gleam on the water's surface can mean a submerged rock. A cluster of lights can signal a town or a passing vessel. A sudden patch of darker water might mark a change in depth. Each sight carries meaning, though none announce themselves boldly. Everything must be interpreted, felt, understood in silence. Every so often, he taps the railing twice, a habit more than a signal. The wood gives a deep, hollow response. It reassures him, reminds him of the distance between himself and the deep water below. Across the deck, another watchman checks the rigging. He moves with care, placing each foot with quiet certainty, knowing exactly where the planks dip or rise. He stops beneath the yards, looks upward, and waits. A single drop of cold water falls from the furled sail and lands on his cheek. He blinks once, then nods to himself. The condensation is growing. The air is shifting. He moves on. The sea begins to hum with a different rhythm, deeper now. Waves lift the hull more noticeably, though still gently. The lanterns flicker in sharper arcs. A coil of rope rolls a few inches before a watchman stops it with his boot. He leaves it where it is. Unnecessary noise feels disrespectful to the night. Down in the hold, a few of the sleeping men begin to stir. They sense the change even before fully waking. Light sleepers feel it in their hammocks. A slightly sharper swing, a thicker heaviness in the air. One opens his eyes into the near darkness, listening to the creak of the hull. Another rolls onto his side, pulling his blanket closer. The ship is not in danger, but it is shifting, preparing. And the body knows before the mind does. Up on deck, the helmsman adjusts his grip on the wheel. He glances toward the captain's cabin. He half expects the door to open, for the captain to step out silently, as he often does when the wind changes. But tonight, the door remains closed. Perhaps the captain is still reading the storm's approach in his mind, waiting for the right moment to act. A thin streak of moonlight breaks through the clouds for an instant. It spills across the deck, bathing the planks in cold silver. The watchmen pause, not in fear, but in quiet appreciation. Moments of beauty are rare at sea. When they appear, they anchor themselves in memory. The light fades again just as quickly. Hours stretch in an elastic way during the night watch. Time becomes slow and fluid. Breaths lengthen. Footsteps soften. The stars turn imperceptibly, marking the passing of time with a grace the sailors never fully tire of. The world contracts into a handful of simple truths. The feel of wood beneath fingers, the sting of salt on lips, the steady beat of the sea, the distant growl of thunder, the presence of companions who share the dark. Nothing more is needed. Nothing more is expected. The night watch is not heroic. It is not dramatic. It is a quiet negotiation between man and the sea, a promise kept in darkness so that dawn may arrive without disaster. And beneath the slow turning of the stars, the promise holds for another hour. Part 11. Whispers of treasure and loss. Night stretches onward, and the ship rocks with the slow pulse of the sea. The storm still gathers in the distance, rumbling like a creature pacing behind a curtain. But for now, the deck is calm enough that the men who cannot sleep drift upward from the hold. They come quietly, one by one, climbing the ladder with soft steps, seeking the open air, not for duty, but for solace. Up here, beneath the dim lanterns and the faint shimmer of the stars, memories rise as easily as mist over warm water. A pirate ship, for all its danger and labor, is also a place of stories. Men carry their pasts with them, some openly, others tucked deep into the folds of silence, and in the hours before dawn, these stories begin to drift from hammock to deck, from deck to mast, from mast to sea. They are soft, hushed, half-muttered tales woven into the fabric of the night itself. Treasure is rarely just gold. Loss is rarely just death. Both are felt more strongly in darkness. A small group gathers near the bow, where the air feels cooler and the wind touches their faces with faint sprays of salt. They speak in murmurs, their voices blending with the creak of the rigging and the distant thunder. One sailor, older than most, sits with his back against the railing. His beard is streaked with gray, and his eyes carry the weight of someone who has crossed more seas than he cares to remember. He begins with a simple line, spoken without pride or sorrow. "I once held a ruby the size of an apricot." The others lean closer, not eagerly, but respectfully. It is not greed that pulls them forward. It is the quiet magnetism of a man who has seen things now far beyond reach. He explains that the ruby came from a merchant ship captured years ago, when his hair was still dark and his hands had not yet learned the ache of cold mornings. The jewel was heavy, warmer than metal, and shaped almost perfectly. He kept it for 2 weeks before trading it for a pouch of coins and a piece of bread in a port he can no longer name. He laughs softly. "I thought I'd live forever. Didn't need riches weighing me down." Another sailor responds with a tale of a brass locket he once found in a chest aboard a Spanish vessel. Inside the locket was a faded sketch of a woman wearing a simple smile, the kind that pulls at the heart. He kept the locket for years, believing it brought him luck, until one night a wave tore across the deck, and swept the chain from his neck. He searched for hours, crawling among barrels and ropes, but luck had slipped from him. Now, when he dreams, he sees the locket sinking slowly into the black water. Loss at sea is not loud. It arrives quietly in small things carried away by wind or wave. A younger sailor, barely older than boyhood, speaks next. His voice is soft and uncertain, as though he is not sure whether he should be telling the story. He admits he has never found treasure, not real treasure, but once, on a stretch of empty shoreline, he found a piece of driftwood shaped like a bird. It had wings curved as if ready to lift off. He carried it with him for years, keeping it among his belongings, touching it before sleep. On a night, much like this one, he gave it to a dying friend in the hold, telling him it would help his spirit fly home. When his friend passed, the crew wrapped the body in cloth and lowered it into the sea. The driftwood bird went with him. The men fall silent for a moment, not out of grief, but out of recognition. Every sailor has watched the sea take someone he knew. The sea does not shout when it claims a life. It simply opens and closes, without trace, without pause. A gust of wind brushes across the deck, lifting the loose ends of cloaks and rattling a line above their heads. Lantern light sways, casting soft gold arcs against the mast. The ship leans slightly, adjusting to a heavier swell, and the men brace instinctively, hands finding rails without thought. When balance returns, so does memory. Another sailor, tall and quiet, tells the story of a map he once owned. It was a crudely drawn thing, marked with symbols that he never fully understood, but it was given to him by a friend who believed it pointed toward hidden treasure. They planned to follow it together once their current voyage ended, but the friend was lost in a skirmish, pierced by a stray arrow during a raid. The map remained folded in a sea chest for months afterward. One morning the sailor awoke and found that a leak had soaked the chest. The ink had bled into shapeless blotches. The treasure, if it existed, dissolved with it. He speaks with a faint smile, neither bitter nor regretful. Maybe it was never meant to be found, he says. Maybe the hunt was the treasure. The others nod. On a ship like this, dreams rarely survive untouched. They are battered by storms, bent by hunger, bleached by the sun. But they are never thrown away entirely. Even the hardest sailor carries a fragment of hope somewhere inside him, wrapped in cloth and hidden beneath layers of routine. As the men speak, the sky shifts again. Clouds gather thicker now, obscuring the moon until it becomes just a pale smear behind the darkness. A curtain of storm wind begins to push across the sea. The lantern light flickers sharply, its flame rising in a narrow spire before trembling back down. Still, the stories continue. One sailor recalls a raid on a merchant vessel where he found a pair of silver spoons carved with swirling patterns. He kept them for months, polishing them with stubborn determination. But then, one night, during rough weather, the spoons slipped from his coat and rolled across the deck. He lunged to catch them, but caught only air. They vanished into the gap between planks, swallowed by the ship itself. Maybe she wanted them more than I did, he jokes, patting the deck beside him. The men chuckle quietly, their laughter soft and shared. Loss binds them as tightly as treasure. Both are equal weights in the stories they carry. The watchman near the stern joins the circle, leaning his shoulder against a barrel. He has a different kind of story, one not of objects, but of a sound. Years ago, during another voyage, he heard singing across the water on a moonless night. No ship was in sight, no land anywhere near. The sound drifted for only a moment, thin and distant, like a voice carried by the wind. He never heard it again. Some men might claim it was a spirit, a warning, or a mermaid. He simply says, "It was beautiful," and leaves it at that. Above them, the shrouds rustle with growing urgency. The storm sends another faint tremor through the air, a low vibration that touches the skin like static before a lightning strike. But the men do not scatter. The night is not yet dangerous. It is still a moment for remembering. Treasure and loss are twin currents in the life of every sailor. One pulls forward, the other pulls inward. And on nights like this, they rise from the depths of memory just as softly as tides rise along a sleeping shore. A final voice breaks the silence. Whatever we lose, the sea keeps. It is said, not with anger, but with quiet acceptance. The men nod again. They know this truth. They have always known it. And as the lanterns sway in their dim arcs and the storm gathers a little closer, the whispers of treasure and loss settle gently over the deck, carried by the wind into the vast, waiting dark. Part 12, Stormfall and the Roaring Dark. The first real wind arrives without warning, sweeping across the deck in a sudden forceful gust that snaps loose coils of rope knocks, lantern flames sideways and tilts the entire ship into a sharp lean that sends every man instantly to his feet. In a single breath, the quiet rhythm of the night vanishes, replaced by an instinctive urgency as the storm finally breaks open above them. Rain follows immediately, falling in cold, needling sheets that sting exposed skin and soak through every layer of cloth within seconds, turning the deck dark, slick, and treacherous. The sky disappears behind rolling masses of black cloud that twist across one another, lit from behind by sudden flashes of violent white lightning. Each flash reveals the rigging in stark, skeletal detail before the darkness falls back into place. Thunder rolls in after, so heavy and deep it vibrates through the planks and pulses up into the sailors' boots. The ship drives forward into rising waves that heave beneath it with mounting force, and for a moment the world becomes nothing but motion. Wood groaning, wind cracking against canvas, water slamming into the hull, and loose gear rattling uncontrollably. Men rush to their stations without a single spoken word, guided by training and fear and the iron-hard sense that hesitation now could spell disaster. The calm of earlier hours vanishes completely, swallowed by the raw noise of the storm. Two sailors sprint toward the mast to secure a thrashing line, their faces stung by rain so heavy it blinds them, but their hands move without hesitation, finding knots by muscle memory alone. The rope lashes through the air like a striking serpent, raising welts on fingers and palms, yet they catch it and pull together, leaning their full weight back as the sail above them fights with an almost violent strength. Inch by inch it bends to their effort, until finally it tightens and holds. The ship shudders, bows down into a deep trough between waves, and then rises sharply again as wind roars through the shrouds and sheets of salt spray burst upward and crash down across the men. Rain merges with the sea so completely that everything becomes a single, swirling torrent of water and noise. Lightning rips across the sky again, so bright that for a heartbeat the entire deck stands frozen in sharp white light. The captain gripping the wheel with both hands, the helmsman braced beside him, the sailors straining against ropes, the sails ballooning like wild creatures desperate to tear free, before darkness plunges back over them. The captain holds his ground at the helm, muscles tight as the wind shoves the ship sideways. He fights the wheel back toward a safer angle, guiding the bow through the worst of the gusts, while rain whips across his face and cloak. The helmsman beside him leans his weight into the effort, boots slipping for a moment on the slick planks before he steadies and helps push the wheel into alignment. Below deck, the sudden tilt sends hammocks swinging violently, dumping some men onto the floorboards where they scramble for purchase, grabbing beams and ropes to keep from sliding as water drips through the ceiling in thin, wind-driven streams. The familiar scent of tar, wet wood, and iron fills the hold as the storm presses its full weight against the ship. They know better than to rush the ladder. They wait for the command they know is coming. It comes with a roar, All hands, get up here. The hold explodes into motion. Feet hammer the ladder. Men surge onto the deck with eyes narrowed against the rain, taking their places without hesitation. Some race to secure barrels that are beginning to shift. Others grab buckets to begin bailing water from the deck as waves crash over the rail again and again. There is no part of the ship untouched by the storm. Wind rages above, the hull groans below, and water forces its way into every gap it can find. A towering wave rises beside the ship, pausing for a terrifying moment before collapsing onto the deck in a brutal sheet of water that sweeps across the planks carrying a bucket, a tangle of rope, and nearly a sailor with it. 2 hands seize him, anchoring him before the sea can pull him overboard. Lanterns blow out one after another, their light extinguished in seconds, leaving the crew guided only by lightning and instinct. Thunder cracks so close it seems to split the air itself. The sails slam against their lines with booming, drum-like force. The ship moans as though the storm is squeezing it in massive unseen hands. Far above, a team of sailors climbs the rigging, gripping rain-slick ropes and forcing themselves upward even as lightning flashes around them. Each movement is a battle against the wind, yet they tie the necessary knots with fierce concentration. The ship bucks hard again, throwing spray across the deck, and rain lashes sideways with enough force to bend men double. 2 sailors at the bow fight to pull in a forward sail that swells dangerously with trapped wind, leaning back so far that their bodies form nearly straight lines as they wrestle the canvas downward. A bolt of lightning splits the sky behind them just as the sail gives way, outlining the scene in a harsh frozen frame. The men braced against the ropes, the captain gripping the helm, the waves rising like black jagged mountains around them. Then darkness crashes back over everything. The wind screams so loudly it swallows every shouted word. Men resort to gestures, hands waving, heads nodding, arms pointing, because speech is useless in the chaos. A loose barrel rolls violently across the deck, and 3 sailors lunge after it, stopping it mere inches before it would have smashed into the helm. Their muscles shake from the effort as they lash it down with thick rope, tying fast knots even while rain stings their eyes and thunder rattles the beams. The sea rises again, lifting the ship to a frightening height. For a moment, it feels as though the vessel is climbing into the sky itself. Then it plunges down the other side, slamming into the trough with a crash that echoes through the hull like the blow of a massive hammer. Still, the crew keeps working, hands blistered, bodies trembling, lungs burning in the wet air. This is not heroism, it is survival in its purest form. Lightning flashes, and the storm roars back in reply. Rain hammers the deck. Waves strike the hull with the force of open palms. The ship groans, strained nearly to breaking, but it continues forward through the furious dark, and beneath all of it, beneath the screaming wind, and the pounding rain, and the unending rise and fall, one truth holds steady. This storm will not be forgotten. It will either break them, or become the night that proves exactly who they are. Part 13. The Slow Return of Light. The storm does not end all at once. It loosens its grip gradually, in small, uncertain steps, as though the sea itself is catching its breath after a long night of fury. The wind still howls across the rigging, but its voice changes, less sharp, less angry, more like a long exhale. The waves remain high, yet their crests soften, losing the feral edge that made them feel alive. The men feel this before they see it. Their bodies, braced for hours, begin to ease slowly, as though the planks beneath their feet have grown more predictable. Rain continues, but instead of striking like needles, it falls in long, slanted sheets that soak the deck rather than batter it. The lanterns are still dark, and the only light comes from the occasional flicker of lightning far behind them. Even that looks different now, more distant, its white threads flickering like weakened signals from a retreating giant. The ship still groans with each wave, but the sounds are steadier, less panicked. The hull no longer shudders at every impact. Lines that had been snapping like whips now sway in longer arcs. Hemp fibers no longer scream with tension. They hum softly, settling back into their normal rhythm. The deck stops pitching quite so violently. Each rise and fall becomes a little smoother, as though the sea has decided to let them pass. Men cling to the rails, panting through salt-soaked lips, their chests rising and falling in heavy rhythm. Their hair sticks to their faces, their clothes cling like second skins, and their hands shake with exhaustion. They have fought the storm for hours, and the fatigue is deeper than muscle. It sinks into the bones, into the quiet places of the mind where fear had been held at bay through sheer necessity. The captain finally loosens his grip on the wheel. He does not step away yet, but he shifts his weight, rolling his shoulders to ease the stiffness. The helmsman beside him mimics the motion. Neither speaks. They simply breathe, letting the quiet seep into them. Rain drips steadily from the brim of the captain's hat and runs down his sleeve, dripping onto the deck in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Below deck, the men in the hold cling to beams as the ship finally steadies. Hammocks sway more gently, no longer swinging like pendulums. A few men climb back into them, lying still, with the limp heaviness of those who have not slept in too long. Others remain seated on the floorboards, backs pressed against the walls, listening to the change in the storm's voice. Back on deck, the clouds begin to thin in places, not dramatically, and not enough to show the moon, but enough for the darkness to lift by a single shade. The water below is still black and restless, but the foam on the wave crests glows faintly, no longer swallowed completely by night. One sailor notices, placing his hand on the railing and leaning over. His breath catches slightly, not in fear, but in relief. It is the first sign that the storm's peak has passed. The sounds change too. The wind shifts from a scream to a long, steady rush. The waves break with less violence, their roars becoming muffled thuds rather than explosive crashes. The ship's timbers creak, but no longer with the sharp, splintering snaps that signal danger. Instead, they groan as though waking from a heavy, dreamless sleep. The men begin to move around the deck again, slowly, carefully. They check the ropes, making sure knots still hold. They examine the sails, looking for tears hidden in the soaked fabric. They retie anything that loosened during the chaos. Their movements are not rushed now. They are deliberate, thoughtful, shaped by the knowledge that their survival depended on these very lines and planks. A few men gather water with cupped hands and drink it directly from the rain, cool, clean, almost sweet. After hours of brine-soaked spray and parched throats, the rain feels like a gift. Others rinse their faces, wiping away the sting of salt. The simple act feels almost ceremonial, as though they are washing away fear. When the sky lightens further, the first hints of dawn reveal themselves, not in color, no pinks, no golds, but in texture. The clouds no longer form a seamless mass. Instead, they break apart into layers, each one slightly lighter than the last. Through one thin place, the faintest suggestion of early morning leaks through. The sailors look up. None of them smile. Smiling takes energy, and they have little left. But their eyes soften, shoulders slump. The tension drains from their arms as they watch the horizon shift, quiet and hesitant, like a shy animal emerging after danger has passed. One man leans against the mast, letting his weight fall into it completely. He closes his eyes and simply breathes the damp air. Another kneels beside a coil of rope and presses both palms to the deck. The wood is slick and cold, but it is solid beneath him, reassuring in a way only a sailor understands. A third man stands by the rail, watching the water. He murmurs something under his breath, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a thank you, perhaps nothing at all. The captain finally steps back from the wheel, letting the helmsman hold it alone. He walks slowly across the deck, inspecting the lines, the mast, the rail, the crew. His boots make soft, wet sounds on the planks. He touches a rope with 2 fingers, tests its tension, nods to himself. Then he raises his gaze to the horizon. The storm is behind them now, its last growls drifting across the water like a retreating beast. Ahead lies dim light, rising slowly, promising a dawn that will reveal the ship in full. The torn places, the soaked timbers, the tired crew, and the survival that binds them all. The sea calms another fraction. The rain lightens to mist. The wind settles into a steady breath. And in that softened half-light, gray, wet, and trembling with relief, the men realize they have crossed through one of the sea's many trials, not unscarred, not unchanged, but still afloat, still together, still carried forward by the stubborn, fragile vessel that has become their home. Part 14. Dawn on the tired deck. Dawn arrives slowly, almost cautiously, as though unsure whether the ship is ready to receive it. The storm has passed, but its memory still clings to every surface. The soaked ropes, the glistening planks, the heavy smell of salt and rain pressed deep into the wood. The sea has quieted to a long, rolling motion, carrying the vessel gently over its broad, exhausted waves. The sky above shifts from charcoal to a pale, muted silver. No one speaks at first. The men move quietly across the deck, stepping around puddles, checking lashings, lifting fallen objects. Their bodies ache with the deep fatigue of a night spent fighting both water and wind. Their clothes cling to them, heavy with moisture. Their hands are rough, their fingers stiff, but their eyes carry the calm relief that comes with survival. The storm has left its marks. A rope has frayed nearly to snapping. A barrel has cracked along one side. A section of the rail has split. The sails sag with patches of torn cloth. None of this surprises the crew. They accept the damage the way a farmer accepts frost on a winter morning. The sea takes, and the sea spares. Today, it has spared them. Lanterns hang dim and waterlogged from the beams. A few men relight them, coaxing flames back to life. The warm glow spreads across the deck in soft, uneven pools, catching in the droplets still clinging to hooks and ropes. The air is cool, almost cold, and each breath rises faintly before dissolving. The captain stands near the wheel, watching the horizon as the sky lightens. His clothes are soaked, his hair plastered to his temple, but his eyes are steady. When he finally speaks, his voice is low and plain, directives about checking lines, sorting supplies, drying what can be dried. The men respond with nods and quiet eyes, moving to their tasks with measured steps. On the port side, 2 sailors lift a length of rope and begin to coil it carefully. The fibers are swollen with water, rough against their palms. They work slowly, laying each loop neatly beside the next. Their movements have a ritual quality, calm, respectful, shaped by habit as much as necessity. Near the bow, another pair crouches beside a torn section of sail. They run their fingers along the rip, assessing how much cloth will need to be replaced. One of them sighs softly, rubbing his shoulder. The other simply nods. They fold the damaged piece with care, as though handling fragile parchment. At the stern, the helmsman stands with one hand on the wheel, holding the ship steady against the lingering swell. His eyes are half closed. Fatigue tugs at his posture, but he remains upright, steady. A sailor hands him a small tin cup of water. He drinks slowly, savoring each swallow, then hands the cup back with a nod of gratitude. Down below, the men in the hold begin to stir. Hammocks sway gently, no longer jerking from sudden shifts. A few sailors sit up, rubbing their faces, listening to the softened rhythm of the sea. They climb the ladder in silence, drawn by the faint morning light filtering down through the cracks. When they reach the deck, they pause, not from shock, only from quiet appreciation. After hours of darkness, the grey morning feels almost holy. Men scatter to small tasks. Some wring out their clothes. Others lift buckets of rainwater and pour them over the deck to clean away the last of the storm. Grit. One sailor kneels beside a warped plank and presses his palm against it, feeling for weakness. Another sharpens a knife that was dulled by the night's chaos. his strokes slow and rhythmic. As the sky continues to brighten, the first hints of color appear. Soft blues, faint yellows, the palest touch of rose along the horizon. The sun has not yet risen, but the world has begun to breathe again. A few men gather near the bow, leaning against the rail. They speak quietly about the night, but not in dramatic terms. They mention loose knots, heavy waves, close calls. They discuss repairs, rations, the wind. No one boasts, no one recounts heroics. Storms at sea are shared experiences. Each man carries his own piece of it, and there is no need to measure them. The storm has washed the ship clean in strange ways. The deck glistens. The ropes look darker and newer. The air smells sharper, less weighed down by days-old sweat and cooking smoke. Even the men themselves, though weary, seem renewed, burned clean by the night's struggle. A gull appears overhead, circling once before drifting away towards some distant shoreline. The men watch it with faint amusement. Birds are a hopeful sign, proof of land somewhere beyond the horizon, even if nowhere near enough to matter. The captain steps toward the bow and rests his hands on the damp rail. He closes his eyes briefly, letting the cool morning air wash over him. When he opens them, he surveys the ship with a quiet sense of pride, not spoken, not shown, but present in the way his jaw relaxes and his shoulders lower a fraction. The sea has softened to a steady rhythm now, its waves gliding rather than crashing. The wind is a whisper. The sky grows brighter still. One sailor begins to hum, a low, slow tune, more breath than melody. Others look over, recognizing the habit. It is the same kind of humming that marked peaceful nights before the storm, but today it carries a deeper weight. It is a reminder of how easily things change, and how precious the calm feels afterward. More voices join, not singing, but humming along, in loose harmony. The sound drifts across the deck, mingling with the creak of drying beams and the gentle slosh of water against the hull. The music is not loud enough to travel far, but it fills the ship with a warmth that lingers even as the sun finally breaks the horizon. A thin line of gold appears. The world brightens. The storm is behind them, and aboard this medieval pirate ship, damp, battered, scarred, but still moving forward, the crew stands together in the new morning light, feeling something like gratitude settle quietly into their bones. The sun rises at last, not in a burst of gold, but in a slow, deliberate bloom that spreads across the sea like a warm breath. The storm's memory still hangs in the air, salt on the ropes, water in the seams, fatigue in the bones, but the ship feels different now, softer, lighter, as though the night has peeled away a layer of fear and left behind something steadier, quieter, more human. The men stand in small groups along the deck, speaking in low voices or saying nothing at all. Some lean on the rail, watching the horizon as though it might reveal a promise. Others sit cross-legged near the mast, letting the morning sun warm their soaked clothes. A few simply lie down where they are, staring up at the rigging with the heavy, unfocused gaze of men who have given everything they had to give. No one rushes, no one shouts. The storm has taken the urgency out of them. The ship, too, seems grateful for the calm. Its planks swell with the warmth of sunlight, shedding droplets like tears. The sails, though patched and scarred, billow gently in the soft breeze. The mast stands firm again, its long spine humming with a more peaceful rhythm. Even the ropes, darkened by rain, dry little by little in the rising heat. As the light spreads, the horizon opens, broad, shimmering, endless. The sea stretches in every direction, a mirror of quiet blues and soft grays. Small ripples dance across its surface, catching the newborn sunlight in bright sparks. The water no longer feels like an adversary. It feels like a companion, mysterious but calm. One by one, the crew settles back into familiar routines. Buckets scrape softly along the deck as men clear the storm's debris. Knives shave thin curls from wooden blocks in careful repair. Wet clothes flap gently as they are hung along the railing. Someone laughs under his breath, quiet, genuine, a rough-edged sound, softened by gratitude. The captain moves among them, not correcting, not commanding, simply watching. His voice, when he uses it, is low and steady. The men answer him without hesitation. The respect they share, tough, unspoken, built through danger, feels stronger now than before. He stops near the bow and rests his hand on the rail. The wood is warm beneath his palm. He looks out over the water, eyes fixed on the distant gleam of morning. The sea stretches before him like a blank page. Whatever lies ahead, calm wind, distant land, another storm, he will face it with the same quiet certainty that carried them through the night. Behind him, a young sailor kneels to tie his boots, fingers still trembling slightly. Another pats his shoulder in passing. Nearby, two men patch a torn sail together, murmuring about the best stitch to hold against the next gale. Farther along the deck, someone hums one of the old melodies again, soft, steady, in no hurry at all. The storm has become memory, nothing more. But memory on a ship is never forgotten. It sinks into the wood, lodges in the ropes, curls into the grain of the mast. It stays with the men in the small shifts of their voices, the steadiness of their hands, the quiet bonds they share. Above them, gulls cry faintly as they glide through the warming air. Their wings catch the first strong beams of sunlight turning white against the sky. The crew watches them with faint smiles. Birds mean land somewhere, far perhaps, but real. The day grows brighter, the sea grows gentler. The ship settles into its familiar rhythm, and for a moment, in the hush after chaos, the world feels safe. If you enjoyed drifting through this piece of the past, maybe leave a like, or just let the story carry you to sleep. If you'd like more quiet journeys like this one, you can subscribe, but only if it feels right. The world remembers you.